All right. Today we are meeting to go over a citizen complaint. We will begin first with citizen complaint comments. And I just want to give some instructions before we get started, just so everyone is clear on how these are to proceed. So all comments are to be directed at the Police and Fire Commission. No questions will be directed to the Police and Fire Commission during these comments. No person shall address the Police and Fire Commission until the President of the Police and Fire Commission has recognized and given that person leave to speak. Comments will not be made by the general public and are limited to the individual parties listed to speak during the comments portion. Comments from the parties will be limited to 10 minutes each. Individuals present at this meeting and/or giving comments must not be disruptive, threatening, or act in a discourteous manner. If any individual fails to conform with these rules despite being cautioned to do so by the President of the Police and Fire Commission, that person may be asked to stop speaking and/or leave the meeting. Decorum will be always maintained at this meeting. Now, we do have all parties present. And so the first party that I am going to ask to come up and allow to speak is Citizen Alyssa Froome. So Alyssa, do you have any comments that you'd like to make?
Yep.
Okay. Please approach the podium. Thank you.
I'm not good at public speaking, so bear with me because this is emotional.
That's fine. Take your time.
My daughter is not here today, and she can't speak for herself to explain what happened to her. And it was the Wausau Police Department's job to find the answers. Instead, they failed her. I want you to... Is it not on?
Yeah, just closer.
Okay. This is what I had to witness. So I'm going to take a good hard look and imagine this is your child. And you're faced exactly what I've had to deal with for almost 2 years. What happened to her is unacceptable. Her death should have never happened. Her death was caused by negligence by so many people, including her father, that had a duty to protect my daughter. Instead, he withheld her well-being from me, and I couldn't do anything to protect her. There's no reason and they can't rectify their actions. No apology can make up for the investigation that was done to her. Instead, they misled it. My train of thought. Now, I hope that this outside agency, Chief Aaron Olson, did his job correctly by looking at all the evidence. The medical examiner withheld a lot of the medical records, and if he was able to pull the ones that were needed, that I have brought forward in my complaint, you'll see that she did not die of what the medical examiner put on her death certificate. She did not die of myocarditis. She died of respiratory failure. And now you need to ask yourselves how that happened. This should have been brought out in the investigation done by the Wausau Police Department. Instead, they buried it. They tried to cover up the truth. They let their own biases affect the judgment of this case. They let their own personal relationships affect the case. It's unacceptable, and they need to be held accountable for their actions, and that referring charges get placed to the Attorney General. You guys have an ethical duty to refer these charges, along with Aaron Olson on the discovery of evidence during his investigation. He also can refer these charges, anything that he has found that is unlawful and illegal. I just can't fathom how this happened and how so many people allowed this to be buried and to cover it up because they don't want to be found guilty. What did my daughter do to deserve this treatment? She was 7 years old. Why cover it? Why did they do what they did? All to protect what? Themselves? What about my daughter? Who was there to protect her? All the parties involved in her death could have saved her life, but they chose not to. Instead, they lied. All the inconsistent statements that were found in these body cameras, none of it makes sense. And what does the detective do? He feeds and tries to mislead it. I hope you watch the body camera videos. I hope you place yourself in my shoes and think this was happening to you guys. How would you feel if this was happening to you? It's unacceptable. No one deserves this. My daughter didn't deserve this. When is it going to stop? Who is going to start standing up and holding people accountable for their actions? I hope today, before you make any decisions, you ask yourselves, does it stop today or does it stop tomorrow? Or are you just going to let this get swept under the rug and hold nobody accountable for their actions? Because I hope today you guys address the appeal and you guys make the right decision. I'm bringing it forward and having that looked at with Chief Bivlin, because his actions do play a part of this, along with everybody else that I have sought for assistance and making sure this investigation was handled properly. He had an opportunity to correct this. Instead, he played party to this, which shouldn't have happened. And I hope the relationships that were discovered don't affect this investigation, and that they have followed their duty-bound and ethical standard to charge and those responsible for their actions in this case. All the policies that I brought forward in my complaint are not only the ones that they have violated. And I did realize that you guys recently, well, the Wausau Police Department recently changed their policy. And I can only assume it was brought onto this case. It's been almost 5 years they didn't do a policy change in their manual. And what provoked it? This complaint. So whatever policy changes that they've made should not affect how you guys make your decision today. The violations that they did were effective when I filed my complaint. So any amended and changing of the policies should not affect. There was a lot more I needed to say, but obviously I can't find the words to figure out to say. I've written how many things to you guys. I've spoken so many times about this. There is no words that can fix this. Nobody should have to be faced with this. And the changes need to happen now. Because think about what's tomorrow. Is another child going to have to suffer this? Another parent going to have to deal with the same situation I'm faced in? I mean, who's going to stand up and change it? I have nothing else to say.
Thank you, Ms. Froome. Okay. We will now hear from citizen Julie Lice. Ms. Lice, do you have any comments you'd like to make?
Yes, I do.
Okay. Please approach the podium. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Julie, and I'm Eliana's grandmother. I love her so very much.
Sorry, 1 second. If you could put the sign down, sir. We don't want any distracting. I want to make sure that we're able to hear Ms. Lice's comments and focus on those. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Julie, and I'm Eliana's grandmother. I love her so very much. I miss my granddaughter every minute of every single day. I filed my 107-page complaint against the Wausau Police Department, 5 of its current and 2 of its former officers, as they have violated, while employed at the Wausau PD, their own official policies and their sworn oath of honor. All the violations I have listed in my complaint fall under the Wausau PD policy version they had at the time I filed my complaint, dated 7/14/2017. It does not fall under the new policy version dated 3/9/22, changed after my complaint had been filed. The Wausau Police Department Policy Manual mandates at 102.1.2, all officers shall abide by the Law Enforcement Code of Ethics, which serves as the basic standard of principle and professional behavior of officers of the Wausau Police Department. I will mention some key points of this Code of Ethics. As a law enforcement officer, my fundamental duty is to serve humanity, to safeguard lives and property, to protect the innocent against deception, the weak against oppression or intimidation. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all. Honest in thought and deed in both my personal and official life. I will never permit personal feelings, prejudice, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. I will enforce the law courteously and appropriately without fear or favor. I recognize the badge of my office as a symbol of public faith, and I accept it as accepted as a public trust to be held as long as I am true to the ethics of the police service. The Wausau Police Department policy states the law enforcement oath of honor. On my honor, I will never betray my badge, profession, my integrity, my character, or the public's trust. I will always have the courage to hold myself and others accountable for our actions. I will always uphold the Constitution, my community, and the agency I serve. It states the Wausau Police Department adheres to the public affirmation of the law enforcement oath of honor. Obtained through open records requests, the body-worn camera videos provide clear evidence of the numerous violations made by the detective placed in charge of my granddaughter's death investigation, as my 107-page complaint laid out for you. Let's start with the fact that the BWC video's date timestamps are not correct. Over multiple pieces of equipment, over multiple officers, over multiple months, and even over multiple years. It must be noted that none of the incorrect times of these date timestamps is of the same amount. To say that it was a technical glitch would be ludicrous. They vary in times anywhere between 5 and 6+ hours. Wausau Police Department policy dictates 422.4 members' responsibility. Prior to going into service, each member will be responsible for making sure that he or she is equipped with a portable recorder issued by the department, and the recorder is in good working order. If the recorder is not in working order, or the member becomes aware of the malfunction at any time, the member shall promptly report the failure to his or her supervisor and obtain a functioning device as soon as reasonably practicable. 422.8, review of recordings. When preparing written reports, members should review their recordings as a resource. Based on this information, it was the responsibility of the Wausau PD members to wear and use the equipment provided them, and that they are to make sure that it is in working order. Then when doing the reports, they were to review those recordings. In the BWC 02 video recording dated 11/16/2020, the detective is heard saying, "They want us to record everything." It was his responsibility to have properly working equipment. It was his responsibility to review these recordings when writing his reports. Why does the BWC recordings have incorrect date timestamps from what he has written in his report? Now, I am going to refer back to the Code of Ethics, where it states that my fundamental duty to protect the innocent against deception. So then why is the detective in charge choreographing a lie and prompting the primary subject to go along with that lie? In the BWC 02, approximately 1 minute and 26 seconds, the detective says, "Hey Josh, I don't know if you remember me, but I'm the guy you bought my bike from me." This detective is acting as if he needs to remind the primary subject who he is. In the same BWC video, at approximately 27 minutes, 41 seconds, the primary subject, out of the blue, without provocation, says to his girlfriend, he's friends with Shovel. If it were true, the only interaction these two had was selling or buying a motorcycle 4 years prior, I want you to think right now of something you sold or bought 4 years ago. And right now, think of that person. And now call up who they're friends with, without any assistance whatsoever. Can you do it? I don't expect you can, and neither can this primary subject. Why do I say that? Well, let's go back to the BWC videos. At BWC 05, at approximately 4 minutes, 48 seconds, the primary subject says he don't know. He can't remember to an answer the detective posed to him. And he claims it's like 2.5 months ago. So if he can't remember something 2.5 months ago in regards to the last days of his daughter, how is he going to remember who he bought a bike from 4 years ago and who they are or are not friends with? Because they have a more current and active relationship. This is a major conflict of interest. This detective should not have been placed in charge of this investigation and should not have been kept in charge in this investigation. He should have been replaced the moment Alyssa had brought the conflict of interest to his superiors. This violates the code of ethics. I will never permit personal feelings, prejudice, animosities, or friendships to influence my decisions. Shovel, mentioned out of the blue by this primary subject, is further discussed in the BWC recording at approximately 28 minutes and 9 seconds when this interaction happened. Detective, I kind of feel bad I missed that funeral, but unfortunately with what I do, primary subject, right. Detective, who he was hanging out with, if it would have primary subject, there were a lot of colors. Detective, it would have been probably better for me to stay away, but I miss riding with him a lot, and he done what he did, and I had no problem with it, that I could have ridden with him more often in the end. And it wasn't because I wasn't willing to, because anytime he wanted to, we would go. This violates the code of ethics. I will keep my private life unsullied as an example to all. Improper conflict of interest goes all the way up to the ranks of the Wausau PD. Chief Bivlin used conflict of interest when acting as an agent for you, the PFC, when you pulled him from my complaint. And when you did not address my 23-page appeal to have him pulled back into my complaint. Even ignoring an email I sent to you March 17th, where I expressed my strong concern that Chief Bivlin would have the opportunity to find someone that will favor him and his department, someone who would not be impartial or fair. That's exactly what he did. In his update given at the PFC meeting dated May 28, 2022, he states, the next call I made was to Marathon County Sheriff's Office. As our local partner, I thought that was a good next step to see if they would be interested and willing to investigate. I talked to Chief Deputy Chad Billab. We talked about the potential conflict because of one of the officers that is named in this complaint is now an employee of Marathon County Sheriff's Office. There is evidence that Chief Bivlin and Chad Billab have been friends for 20+ years, per Chad Billab himself. This evidence was supplied to you. Why is Chief Bivlin speaking about a conflict of interest because of one of the officers named in the complaint now works for Marathon County? A much bigger conflict of interest is at hand here. But neither of them care to address that. No, Chief Billab had every intention to get his friend of 20+ years to help him out of this. Then we have to question the person that he did get to do this investigation into this complaint. Why give me a letter stating I had 30 days to request in writing the dismissal be reconsidered by the PFC if you were only going to do is ignore my appeal and allow him to act as an agent for you all, thus allowing him to go to his friends to sway the outcome of this investigation to his favor? The primary subject and his girlfriend have lied in these BWC videos recordings. The detective has failed to hold them accountable for their lies. Lying to a police officer is a crime. Yet no charges have ever been filed on either this primary subject or his girlfriend. What I have said here today just scratches the surface of my complaint, which lies out before you all. The evidence, including the supporting material, is upon you to act and hold them accountable for their actions. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lice. Next, we will hear from Chief Bivlin. Chief Bivlin, do you have any comments to make? Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Appreciate the opportunity to address the Police and Fire Commission in regards to this complaint. I'll just address a couple of things in response to a few things that were said previously. First and foremost is in regards to our policy and procedure manual. We update that policy and procedure manual on a very regular basis as laws change, as case law changes, as best practices change. We're an accredited law enforcement agency, and so it's our responsibility to stay on top of best practices in law enforcement and make sure that we have the best procedures and policies. So that's why we change policies on a regular basis, and we track all of those and have records of all of those things. This is a difficult case. It isn't difficult from an investigative perspective. From an investigative perspective, the investigators, the physicians, the medical examiner, the district attorney all agree. There wasn't a crime committed. This was a natural death, and it's difficult because we recognize that a grieving mother and step-grandmother are unable to accept that truth, and that's what makes this a difficult case. Anytime there's a child death in our community, it's a tragedy, and we respond to child deaths way too frequently. Obviously, the loss of a young life has a profound impact on our community and on loved ones and on family members, and I would say on our law enforcement team as well. When we ask our law enforcement officer applicants, why do you want to be a police officer? They tell us it's because they want to help people. And we have the privilege, the opportunity, and the responsibility to serve some of the most vulnerable people in our community. And oftentimes those most vulnerable people are children. And some of the most impactful and important cases that we work on involve children, involve crimes against children. And those are some of the most important cases that we work. And we take these cases very seriously. And I can't express to you the importance that we place on those investigations and finding the truth in those investigations. And that's our goal. We don't take sides. We look to find the truth of the matter. We want to serve justice where justice needs to be served. And we also want to make sure that we hold people accountable who need to be held accountable. But sometimes in investigations, there just isn't a crime. And that is what we found in this case. There was no criminal neglect, and the district attorney's office agreed that there was no crime to be charged here in this case. And that's the truth of the matter. In regards to the complaint, last August, 4 months prior to the complaint being filed with the Police and Fire Commission, our deputy chief took a phone call from his least, and we started, per policy, an internal investigation, and we completed an internal investigation by the end of August into a number of the complaints. And so I know what we found in our investigation, and I trust that Chief Olson will tell you what he found in his investigation. Our investigation in August determined that the complaints were unfounded. You've heard me talk a lot about the core values of the police department at our Police and Fire Commission meetings. We're a character-based organization, and we believe strongly in our values and in our ethics. Our hiring process ferrets that out. It's an arduous process. We have many interviews. We require an extensive background investigation. We require psychological examinations. We put everybody that comes into our employment through a polygraph examination because ethical behavior and truthfulness is of the utmost importance. We hire for character and we train for skill. If someone isn't ethical or truthful, then we hold them accountable and they cannot work for us anymore. And there's many cases that prove that within our department. So you guys know the high level of accountability we have within our department. My expectations of staff, their conduct both on and off duty, the way they serve, the way they investigate, their compassion for people, I have the highest of expectations of them. And just to reinforce the level of accountability and expectations we have within our organizations, I'm just going to give you a couple of quick examples. And we have had staff members over the years, some sworn, some non-sworn, who have done unethical things. When those things happen, we promptly put them on administrative leave, we investigate, and if necessary, we terminate their employment. Some of them have resigned in lieu of that termination because we don't tolerate unethical behavior. We can't. I will say in addition, based on some of the information that was provided to the Police and Fire Commission through this complaint, I was connected to some of the people we've terminated on social media. Just because I'm connected to them on social media doesn't mean that I'm going to compromise my integrity for them, period. One of the primary complaints in this case is that of bias and conflict of interest. First, I'll say there weren't any relationships within this investigation that would even constitute bias or conflict of interest, period. In addition, I will say, as a policy within our department, we won't even dismiss a $5 parking ticket because of a relationship. We don't give breaks on traffic stops to anyone. In fact, our policy is to issue citations to our own officers if they're at fault in an on-duty accident. If someone name drops the chief, officers know that that earns them no special privilege, and they treat them as such. Over the years, we've even arrested sworn law enforcement officers if the investigation shows they've committed criminal conduct. So the complaint of bias and conflict of interest is patently false. Usually, when people think about accountability, they think about it in a punitive sense, in a disciplinary sense. And I'm going to talk about accountability, and I'm going to be accountable to our team in this investigation in a positive way today. The initial responding officers provided life-saving care to Eliana Froome, CPR. They kept her alive so she could make it to the transport to the hospital. The lead detective in this death investigation is a good and competent investigator. He's been a law enforcement officer for more than 20 years. Our office manager, who handles and oversees open records, has served the city for more than 20 years. She's one of the nicest, most ethical people you will ever meet. Her team is the engine that keeps our department running well. They do a great job, and she is extraordinary. Our detective lieutenant, who oversaw this case, has almost 3 decades of law enforcement experience. Half of those, he's been a detective supervisor, leading investigations, dozens and dozens of death investigations he's led. He knows what he's doing. He has tremendous experience, knowledge, and I would say a ton of compassion for people who are being investigated and who are victims of crime. The allegations made against our department are false. Our team conducted a professional investigation and they followed policy. There was no bias or conflict of interest, and I stand by their investigation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Bliven. So next up, we have Chief Aaron Olson from the Neenah Police Department. Now, over the past months, Chief Olson has committed his time and resources in assisting the Wausau Police and Fire Commission in conducting an outside investigation looking into both the complaints of Ms. Froome and Ms. Leist. Over that time, he has pored over a number of submissions from the parties and investigated the allegations made in the citizen complaint against officers of the Wausau Police Department. And I want to wholeheartedly thank Chief Olson for all his efforts and assistance in this matter. Chief Olson has concluded his investigation and will now share his findings with the Wausau Police and Fire Commission and the parties. Thank you, Chief Olson. The floor is yours.
Thank you, and good morning.
Good morning.
I thought about preparing a statement just to read to you this morning, but I thought it'd be better just to talk freely about what I've uncovered or found, and then really more answer your questions that you may have. And in my 24 years of law enforcement and 15 years in the military, there's one thing that can be said about me from everyone who's I've worked with or supervised, and that is that I will hold you accountable. So if you go back all those years, that'll be the one thing people will say is Aaron Olson held me accountable. I've demoted friends, I've suspended many people, fired many people, and some of those I had relationships with. So when the chief asked me to do this, I said I would definitely help because I believe in helping other law enforcement agencies. But I say all this because when I started this investigation, I'm an unbiased person in this investigation. I'm not going to take anyone's sides. I'm going to uncover the truth, and whether the police do something wrong or anything like that. It will be easy for me to say that the police did something wrong because I'm not going to be biased in the situation. So as you can see in front of me, this was a large investigation. So the first thing I did is I read through all of these binders. And it took a lot of time. And as I read through the complaints, I started to think, wow, the Wausau Police Department may not have done a great job. Detective Laporte may have been biased. That was my first initial reaction when I read through these binders. So I was concerned. I was concerned that there was some bias in this investigation. I was concerned that the detective did not do a great investigation. I was concerned that the detective had a unprofessional relationship with a biking member of a gang. But then as I reread everything and then interviewed Detective Laporte and I interviewed the clerk at the police department, all those feelings that I had that there was problems at the Wausau Police Department were unfounded. Some of the easy things to talk about right away is we talk about the timestamps on the body-worn cameras. Well, that's easily explainable because Zulu time. Most people don't know that body cameras aren't set on our Central Standard Time. They're set on Zulu time. So it's very understandable that Julie would be upset, or Alyssa would be upset that it appears that the officers did not do their job by not knowing the timestamps. But they obviously didn't know, and I didn't know when body cameras first came out either, that they're set on Zulu time. So in my investigation, on page 19 of my investigation, I pulled up the time of every interview and compared them to Zulu time, which you can easily Google. And you can put in Central Time of whatever date and time that was that day and ask what is Zulu time? And then it'll give you what the time is showing. So that was an easy one. That was one of the major complaints that they had, was the officers are unprofessional because they aren't prepared, their equipment doesn't work. Easily explainable. Okay. If you have the complaints in front of you and my conclusion, it is 21 pages long, and most of it is I had to go through and from the day the event happened until basically I was asked to do this investigation. I outlined everything that happened, almost every conversation, right down to when reports were turned in, when they were approved by the lieutenant. And I had to do that because I had to get a full understanding of what happened in this investigation. And the only way I was able to do that is to start from day one and work through every single day of what any detective or Wausau police member or doctor did. And once I was able to do that, then it really brought the puzzle together. And that's where I was able to make my conclusions, which start on page 17. There were a lot of, I believe there's around 60 items that our complainants said that the police department did wrong. But I broke them down into 8 main categories. One was the Zulu time, and then I'll start from the beginning, and that was failure to adequately satisfy open record requests. And I marked this as exonerated because my investigation found that, yes, this violation occurred, but it wasn't because of ill intent, it was because of a process error. So there would be a difference if there was ill intent. This just turned out to be a process error, which has since been fixed. So that's why that was marked exonerated. The second is deficiencies in response and reporting by initial responding officers Joshua Bigger and Officer Rizzo. And this comes down to best practice in policing. And I will get into everything that I wrote on this. You can ask questions if you want, but in conclusion, for that was unfounded. This allegation is most definitely false, because it's unreasonable to have police officers review every body-worn camera footage that they have. That would be unreasonable for the amount of work officers do every single day. They can't go on every single call, stop, review their body-worn camera, and dictate exactly verbatim what was said. Unreasonable. Number 3 was the conflict of interest between Officer Bigger and Katie Normand. And this is most definitely unfounded, and this allegation is false. And that's easily proven through the conversations on body-worn cameras that these two did not even recognize each other. And
Excuse me. So we allowed everyone to speak uninterrupted. So please allow Chief Olson to continue his presentation without any further interruption.
And it was easily, you can easily see that this was a professional relationship that they had met a couple times. They didn't even recognize each other. And the fourth is the conflict of interest between Detective Laporte and then Katie Normand and Joshua Least. Again, this is unfounded. When I first read through, I was concerned, but as you unravel this, that is clearly unfounded. And to sell a motorcycle online, and that's the time you meet 4 years prior, that does not constitute a relationship. We've probably all met someone in our lives 4 years prior, didn't talk to him again. That doesn't mean we have a relationship. So that was clearly unfounded for me. Number 5 is the biases that Detective Laporte was reportedly having. Now, like I said, at first I was very concerned about this. You do not want a sworn law enforcement officer of any agency having a relationship with a gang member or a motorcycle gang member. And when I came here to Wausau PD and I interviewed Detective Laporte, I was unbiased. I interviewed him, and by the end of the interview, I was very comfortable that this was not a relationship. They knew each other prior to this member becoming a gang member in a motorcycle gang. And then they didn't ride again together, except for one time where they ended up in a group, but it was not calculated. It was not set on a calendar. It was just mere coincidence that they ended up in a ride together. And what really concerned me was in the body-worn camera where Detective Laporte talked about how he really missed this person. He wished he could have been to his funeral. But again, he dispelled my fear of him having this relationship by once this person entered the gang, there was no more relationship. So that was also unfounded. Number 6 was inadequate and unprofessional investigation by the Detective Laporte. If you read through the citizen complaints and you didn't know anything about law enforcement, you could probably say or believe that Detective Laporte did not do a great investigation. It isn't until you read all of the reports from the doctors and understand how detectives interview people, such as when a detective or officer interviews somebody, they set them at ease. It isn't like the movies where you just walk into an interview room and ask a question, they confess. Okay, you have to build that rapport. And Detective Laporte is obviously a seasoned investigator, and he does a great job of setting people at ease. Whether it was walking into a room and talking about their cats, walking into a room and talking about motorcycles, whatever it was, he set them at ease. And then there was nothing in the investigation that steered Detective Laporte towards ill intent. He's not a doctor. I'm not a doctor. He had to go by what the doctors and not me said. And at no point did any doctor believe there was ill intent in this case, which is also proven through their investigations as well. So at no point was he steered in that direction. So he didn't nail down how many Tums exactly, how much water she drank, all these things because the doctor said it didn't matter. Not that it didn't matter, but no matter how many glasses of water she drank, she would have unfortunately died that day. And that's the unfortunate part about this. No one wants to deal with a child death because it's horrible. And Detective Laporte did a great job of investigating this because he tried to uncover every stone. But no stone led him to that path that said there was ill intent. So, for that reason, this was unfounded. For number 7, Detective Laporte violated standard of conduct 320. We talked about that already. And then the Zulu time, which we already talked about. Now, I did recommend a few changes. They're recommendations from me. Number 1 is body-worn cameras. I would recommend that every detective be issued a body-worn camera so they don't have to borrow one from somebody or go check one out. It's already labeled for them. That's an expense, and that's up to the city of Wausau to do. And then additionally, I recommended that the Wausau Police Department eliminate the Axon software that integrates each RMS and CAD incident and have each individual officer or detective label and categorize their own videos. A lot of police departments do this, some don't. Some do it how Wausau Police Department does it. But it's my belief that this will eliminate the meshing process between Axon and the CAD system. And by doing so, they'll create a more accurate labeling system while making it more time sensitive. You really have to kind of understand body-worn cameras and RMS to maybe grasp that comment. But this would also eliminate the need to create a follow-up incident number when the follow-up is done 12 hours later, as the follow-up case is not automatically linked with the original one. Second, and I believe this has already been addressed by the police department, is really no bearing on this case, but I feel that when you are a sworn law enforcement officer, you should dress accordingly. And throughout the videos and the Zoom calls, I saw that Detective Laporte was continually dressed unprofessionally, and I feel sometimes that reflects on your job and how you perform. So even though that's really wasn't my scope in this matter, I put that in there because I felt it was important that Detective Laporte and anyone representing law enforcement profession dresses appropriately. Third is report writing. One of the complaints in the incident pertained to an officer not completing a written report. And while the complaint could be valid to the letter of the policy, it's not the spirit of the policy. And policies are just guidelines. And Wausau Police Policy 322.2 talks about officers writing reports. And again, that's for the spirit of the policy. It should be, there's no possible way that every time 5 officers go on one call, that 5 officers can write a report. There's not enough time in the day for officers to do that. They're too busy. Every single year, call volume goes up, and we're not able to do that in law enforcement. So it's a best practice that one person writes it, but it gets all of the information correct. So I suggested altering that policy so that a citizen understands it more. It's not the letter of the law. It's a policy. And with that, it's also not realistic, which I mentioned before, is to take a body-worn camera and review it and dictate everything you say. Again, that's not realistic. We have to paraphrase. Unless it's an incident where we know that we know a crime is committed, and then we can go back and do that. But this particular case, it was unfortunate, but it's common. There was nothing that led the investigators, officers to believe that there was a crime. So that's very much paraphrasing, but I don't want to have to read my 20-page report to you. Obviously, that's just kind of the highlights. And if you have any questions for me, I'd be happy to answer.
Are there any questions before we go into a closed session?
Thank you for your time and your report. We do appreciate it. My first question is relative to the completeness of the records that you reviewed. In terms of all of the complaints, backup records, appeals, have you received the complete documentation related to this case, or is there anything that was omitted from your review?
As far as I know, I've received 100% of everything that the Wausau Police Department has.
Okay. In your findings, you notably omit all but 3 officers. Earlier, it was referred to that 5 current, 2 former officers. You only referenced 3 officers in your report.
Correct.
Can you explain why, given all the records and the complaints and all the other officers named?
Although they were named, there was nothing in there that I found that they really had anything to do with the case. They were there, they may have approved reports, things like that, but nothing would have led me to add what they did in the report because they didn't do anything. They were just supplemental. So there's really no need to add them. I focused on the ones that were the main players in this investigation.
So just 2 more questions. In your opinion, did the actions of any of the members of the Wausau PD violate any statute, ordinance, policy, or procedure?
None.
Second, did any potential violation, which you just said was none, or omission during this investigation contribute to the findings of the medical examiner or the pathologist?
None.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the commission before we proceed? Okay. Thank you, Chief Olson. Oh, sure.
Chief, were you compensated at all for your efforts?
None. No.
The city, received no compensation?
None.
Thank you. Now that we have heard from all the parties and Chief Olson, who conducted the outside investigation of the complaints, we will now proceed to go into closed session pursuant to Wisconsin Statute Section 19.851F for consideration and deliberation related to citizen complaints by Ms. Julie Lice and Ms. Alyssa Froome against various Wausau Police Department officers, and consider the request for reconsideration of dismissal of complaints by Ms. Julie Lice and Alyssa Froome against Chief Benjamin Bliven. I respectfully request that Chief Olson join the commission in closed session for any follow-up or questions the commission may have during its closed session deliberation. Is there a motion to go into closed session?
I'll make a motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. We are,
Should do a roll call.
yes.
Lloyd? Aye.
Harris, aye.
Bar here.
Graph here.
All right. We are now in closed session. Thank you.